Hi everyone and welcome to the video today. In today's video I'll be covering what time period and which galaxy the next Mass Effect game could take place in. Now I've done this both recently and in the past 2 years, but I really wanted to cover it again here as in the topic of what galaxy and time period the next game will take place in. Because on N7 Day 2023 this year we got loads of new evidence, news and teases from BioWare directly when the next Mass Effect game could take place in. The next Mass Effect game could be releasing anywhere from 2025 to 2029, which loads of rumours have been flying around lately, basically covering the fact that this game could be, a while. But even though the game won't be coming out for a while, we can still speculate and talk about everything regarding the next game. So today I'm going to break down in this video into evidence points for this game taking place in both the Milky Way galaxy just after Mass Effect 3's ending, and then cover evidence separately for this game taking place in the Andromeda galaxy in the far future. These two time periods will be 2186 or a few years after, and then 2819 when Mass Effect Andromeda takes place in. Again, although BioWare could set this game a few years, potentially after these dates, for example, although the game could be set just after Mass Effect 3, it could be something like 10 years afterwards. So let's get right into it. Let's start off with evidence for this game taking place near the ending of Mass Effect 3. Now, I'll cover the sort of opposite point to this later, but firstly we have the fact that Liara is alive and well. Obviously, Liara Tassoni is a character that was featured in Mass Effect 1, 2 and 3, and then in cameo form in Mass Effect Andromeda. However, she was a main squad mate and character in the original trilogy and is beloved by the entire Mass Effect community, with some even romancing her. And obviously she's back here and she's alive and well, so that's one evidence to suggest that this game could take place directly after Mass Effect 3 in the Milky Way galaxy, because we know that travel to Andromeda takes a very, very long time, but we'll have to wait and see. Next up is N7 Day 2022, we got what is known as the secret transmission, and in the bottom left corner we got a potentially some scrambled up text, and within this text we actually get the date 2190, which would actually set that, potentially this is when the recording of this secret transmission is taking place in, suggesting that the next game could take place in 2190, or at least this transmission takes place in that date period rather. Next up we have the fact that in the reveal trailer all the way back in 2020 from the Game Awards, we have Liara on an icy planet finding some old N7 armour. She actually takes apart the armour to have a look at the N7 plate, sort of scraping off the snow, and this is directly off the old armour from the old games. So why would BioWare include this if it's not a reference to the original trilogy games? Next up we have the fact that also in the reveal trailer from 2020 we have dead Reapers, as well as what looks like parts of the Citadel floating in space, as well as dead Reapers on the icy planet. These were also confirmed by Mike Gamble, who's going to be the project director on the next game, as these are definitely dead Reapers, and obviously the Reapers were the sort of main antagonist, or one of the main antagonists in the original trilogy, so them appearing again is no coincidence. Next up we have the N7 Day 2021 poster. In this poster we have quite a lot of things, but the main two things being here that we get a crater in the shape of a Gef's sort of head or face, I don't know what you'd call it, let's just say face for now, or helmet, I don't know, head I guess. But we also have the fact that scattered on this planet we have loads of dead Gef on the floor, and obviously the Gef only appear in the original trilogy games, so although this could take place, in the Milky Way galaxy in the far future, this sort of also gives an indication that we could be returning just after Mass Effect 3's ending. But again, this also puts it into wild speculation, because Mass Effect 3 has 4 endings, technically 5 endings if you count the Perfect Destroy separately from the Destroy ending, but it's the fact that all the endings could be canon, and again we don't know how BioWare are going to treat this going into the next game, because they're going to have to address it in some way, shape or the other. And my sort of point here is that the Gef in a lot of these endings are basically, for example, the Destroy ending, all synthetic life is destroyed, and then obviously you have Synthesis and Control, which impacts all synthetic life, which includes the Gef. So we'll have to wait and see how the hell BioWare address the Geth. Speaking of the Geth, we also have DC Douglas, who is the voice actor behind Legion as well as the Geth, teasing it all the way back in 2022, as well as quite recently on the N7 Day sort of cast reunion, that he will be returning to voice the Geth. And, you know, this one's not really too much of a big stretch, it makes complete sense. He's the voice of the Geth are returning in some way, shape or form, because we actually see a Geth in the brand new nightclub shot. It's a Geth wearing robes of all things that look sort of either medieval or religious in some way, shape or form, so that's kind of cool there. So at the end of the day, if the Geth are returning, DC Douglas is going to return. I don't think Legion's going to return because, well, Mass Effect 3 exists, but in terms of the story with Legion, but I do think he will be returning to voice the Geth. Speaking of this nightclub shot, during N7 Day 2023 we got a brand new poster of this brand new N7 armor character who a lot of people are thinking is going to be the new protagonist. And in this nightclub we see loads of alien races, particularly from the Milky Way galaxy, from the original trilogy of Mass Effect games. We see the Hanar, we see Volus, Krogan, Turians, Human, Asari, Solarians. We see the whole lot basically, and that's really cool. But we also see, which I've covered in its own dedicated video, we see a Ralloy, who are a bird anthropomorphic like species who are actually referenced in Mass Effect 2 and 3 but aren't shown on screen. So we could be potentially seeing the Ralloy in the next Mass Effect game, and again, this because the Ralloy, we have no sort of evidence to suggest that they're in Andromeda, however they are in the Milky Way, so this again is more evidence to suggest that this game could be taking place in the Milky Way right after Mass Effect 3. Next up, again in this same nightclub shot, we have a Turian that looks suspiciously like Garrus. Obviously Garrus is a well-beloved character and one of the main squad mates in all three of the original trilogy games, and obviously BioWare know Garrus is a fan favourite. Whether this is Garrus or not is its own video, however, I've got to be honest, we don't know as of yet. This could just be a Turian that looks like Garrus. They could have just put it in for a bit of fun to get people speculating. But if it is Garrus, then obviously this is confirmation that it does take place sort of near or around the ending of Mass Effect 3 because of a Turian's lifespan not being as long as something like an Asari, for example. Also, speaking of which, BioWare know the majority of the fan base want a Mass Effect 4. Now, what I mean by this is that a lot of people grew up with the original trilogy. Then obviously Andromeda came out and the reception for Andromeda wasn't as warm as, say, Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3. And obviously people have grown attached with the original trilogy characters and story, including the original Normandy and Normandy crew. So a lot of people want those characters, story elements, planets, weapons, features to all return. And obviously we've actually heard rumours that the game will be returning to the classic sort of layout of gameplay rather than the open world structure of Andromeda, which is, in my opinion, a good sign. But again, this, you know, I do think that BioWare know damn well that they want people, they know that people essentially want a Mass Effect 4. But again, we've got no idea sort of officially when the game is going to take place, but I think we can make sort of safe assumptions here and there. We also get in the sort of post-credit scene for Mass Effect 3, or one of the post-credit scenes, is the Stargazers talking to a child on a planet, which, by the way, is an ice planet with 2 moons, which we see in the reveal trailer, just pointing that out there. But the Stargazer is talking to the child effectively says, "I want another story with the Shepard, with Commander Shepard," and the Stargazer goes, "Alright, I'll tell you one more story." And by the way, here is the clip in full so you can sort of get context towards it. But I think this is really interesting because if you take into account the post-credit scene for the Perfect Destroy ending, then you take this into account as well, it seems as though BioWare were really sort of leaving the door open for Shepard to return. And obviously BioWare know how much people love Commander Shepard as well, both male and femme Shep as well as custom Shep. So I do think that potentially this could be evidence for Shepard as well as the original trilogy returning in some way, shape or form for the next Mass Effect game.
Did that all really happen? Yes, but some of the details have been lost in time. It all happened so very long ago.
When can I go to the stars?
One day, my sweet.
What will be there?
Anything you can imagine. Our galaxy has billions of stars. Each of those stars could have many worlds. Every world could be home to a different form of life. And every life is a special story of its own.
Tell me another story about the shepherd.
It's getting late, but okay. One more story.
Speaking of the Perfect Destroy ending, in the director's cut ending for the Mass Effect 3 Citadel DLC, which is the sort of final DLC, it was the sort of director's cut DLC that was right at the end of Mass Effect 3's lifespan. We got a end credit scene which was technically the hardest to get, but in reality it's actually the second hardest to get. This ending effectively had you maxing out your war assets in Mass Effect 3, and then right at the end of the game it's revealed that Commander Shepard is still alive. Commander Shepard is under the rubble and drawing breath, meaning that Shepard is alive. So again, this is more evidence to the fact that obviously Shepard is the main character of the Mass Effect series. Obviously you've got Ryder and Andromeda, but Shepard obviously having 3 games takes priority, and especially with BioWare knowing how much people love Shepard, especially with them pushing the merchandise for Commander Shepard in the original trilogy over Andromeda, I feel like the game could be returning to the sort of Milky Way, just after, I think sort of 3 to 10 years after Mass Effect 3's ending would be sort of a good point to carry on from. Next up we have back in the day, all the way in 2021 during N7 Day, that poster that I mentioned earlier with the Geth's head as well as the dead Geth all over the floor. BioWare actually posted this to the BioWare Gear store where you can obviously buy all their merchandise and everything. However, the description for this poster was really interesting because if you read what's on screen right now, they actually suggested that Commander Shepard would be returning, as well as the fact that the original Normandy crew, and it would effectively be carrying on the story. Now this was quickly taken down and replaced, and BioWare's statement on this was effectively that this was a mistake and that obviously this doesn't confirm anything. So although the game is in pre-production, I do definitely think that this was done intentionally by whoever was uploading this description, or maybe they just gave it to somebody who doesn't know Mass Effect at all and they just had to quickly write something for the description. And again, it's a more tinfoil hat sort of stuff, speculation, this one, but it does definitely, we definitely have to add it because it's a official thing that BioWare put out technically, and although it's taken down now and obviously the description for the poster is completely different, it's a lot more vague, but again, this is another piece of evidence that the game could be taking place in the Milky Way galaxy straight after Mass Effect 3. And lastly, in the brand new trailer which we got for N7 Day 2023, which we've got our new character with a helmet and a gun and a sort of cool leather coat or trench coat with N7 on it right here, walking down out into what looks like a hangar or a planet. We see this planet in the background, and if you sort of look at the skybox, although it's really blurry, for me it kind of looks like Tuchanka from Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3. Now again, Tuchanka is obviously a fan favourite planet because it's where the Krogan reside from, as well as, speaking of Krogan, I've covered this in its own video, but we actually see in the opening shots of the trailer, we see a Krogan sort of hidden in the background, moving, wearing armour that's similar to the Arlac company that we see with Grunt in Mass Effect 3, and I've sort of done a whole video on this, so if you want that sort of explored a bit more, you can go ahead and watch that. But it's really interesting because in this trailer for N7 Day 2023, you can hear loads of different musical cues, and if you listen carefully to all of these different musical cues, you can actually hear different ones, basically different track references all the way from Mass Effect 1 to Mass Effect 2, 3 and Andromeda. So that's all the evidence for the game taking place just after Mass Effect 3's ending, potentially a few years afterwards. So I now wanted to cover all of the evidence for the game taking place in the far future, potentially 600 years plus. So firstly we have N7 Day 2023, where we got 3 different encryptions that gave us the teaser trailer for the N7 Day 2023 with our brand new character. In these encryptions we got 2 things that are really interesting. Obviously there's a lot more which I've covered in dedicated videos, but these 2 things give us evidence for the game not only taking place in the Andromeda galaxy, but taking place in the far future. So firstly we get a Andromeda distress signal detected, which is really interesting. The only sort of past distress signal that we've had from the Andromeda galaxy was the Quarian arc. Now this storyline was covered in the novelization of Mass Effect Andromeda called Mass Effect Andromeda Annihilation, and it's just really interesting here because we don't know if the 2 are related, or this could be something brand new, and I personally think this distress signal is something brand new, but again it's evidence nonetheless. And now the 3 encryptions that I talked about earlier, we got Epsilon, Post Nebula, as well as Oculon, which are all references, by the way, to what Mass Effect was going to be called before they sort of finalised on the title Mass Effect, which is really cool in my opinion. But one of the dates in the Oculon post was 2819. Now this date is really interesting because this is the exact year that Mass Effect Andromeda takes place in, which is really interesting, because why would BioWare throw this in if the game has got nothing to do with Andromeda? Now, although this doesn't necessarily confirm Andromeda as in being our main galaxy, we also have this date, but again this could take place in the Milky Way in the far future. But again, the whole thing's really muddled, and especially after looking at the sort of evidence as a whole, it gets even more confusing, which I think is brilliant for speculation purposes, but it's going to be really frustrating because we're probably not going to see this game for a very long time, which means we're going to be a bit scratching our heads for the time being. But hey, it's going to be fun to speculate nonetheless. But in terms of this date, obviously the arcs left the Milky Way galaxy during the events in between Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3, and then the arcs then took 634 years. This is actually in writing, dated in Andromeda's sort of opening shot, as 634 years it took the arcs at, well, I'd say I almost said light speed then, but at sort of FTL to get to Andromeda to essentially escape the Reaper invasion. So again, that could tie into the next Mass Effect game. Next up, some more evidence here is Liara again. Now, although Liara, again, for me, it's really 50-50, but Liara could be older in this shot. A lot of people have been talking about this all the way back since we had that initial reveal trailer at the Game Awards 2020, but Liara T'Soni could be older. For me at least, it kind of looks like she's got visible crow feet, wrinkles and blemishes, which she didn't have in the original trilogy. Now, although yes, she could be older, technically speaking, a few years, 10 years, we know that Asari can live 1,000 years plus, going into their matriarch stage, etc. So Liara could definitely be older in this next game, and she could be an Asari matriarch still taking on the mantle of the Shadow Broker, as we actually had the fact that the Shadow Broker has been teased in sort of various bits and bobs and referenced for the next game. So again, you wouldn't have, in my opinion, you wouldn't have Liara and then her not be the Shadow Broker. It just doesn't add up. But again, this is really 50-50. This shot in the reveal trailer could be Liara T'Soni, a few years after Mass Effect 3's ending, but it also could be Liara in the far distant future. Again, it's really up for debate, because we also see a brand new vehicle, which is the XTB, or the XT8 Mudskipper, which is a sort of ground to planet vehicle, which was similar to the shuttles that we saw in the original trilogy and Andromeda. But we also see Liara with a brand new crew in the background, which looks like a Solarian, a Krogan, a human in various different shots. We also see some new characters sort of walking on the N7 Day 2021 poster. But for me, why would Liara be with this brand new crew rather than the Normandy crew, unless something happens to the Normandy crew just after Mass Effect 3? But again, for me, Liara would probably stick with the Normandy crew. So for me, this is evidence that the game takes place in the far future. And probably, a lot of you have probably worked out by now that if the game does take place in the far distant future, a lot of fan favourite characters such as Tali, for example, will be dead because they just won't have lasted that long, which, breaks my heart, as Tali is my favourite character. But again, we don't know yet. We'll have to wait and see. We also have the fact that more evidence for the game taking place in Andromeda as well as the far future. We have the fact that BioWare employees have actually been replaying both the original trilogy, the Legendary Edition, and Mass Effect Andromeda for essentially getting ready to make the next Mass Effect game, because the game is still in pre-production. They're still writing the story, they're still doing CG, motion capture, all of that good stuff, and sort of working out how the game's going to play. We also have the fact that Mike Gamble, over the sort of past 3 years, has been teasing the heck out of this next game, but specifically has been replying to things regarding Mass Effect Andromeda. And, people saying, well, we like Andromeda, we don't want to go back to the, Milky Way galaxy with the original trilogy, we want essentially an Andromeda sequel. And he has actually replied to tweets effectively saying, well, if you look in the reveal trailer, if you look at N7 Day 2023, those references to Andromeda were all intentional, which I think is really cool. I mean, one of the oldest tweets that Mike Gamble did was somebody basically talking about the opening shot of the reveal trailer for the next Mass Effect game, where it shows off both the Milky Way and Andromeda galaxies, and Mike Gamble actually said that yes, that was intentional. And again, we've got loads of evidence to suggest that this next game could feature both galaxies. I think personally, for me, that would be the best thing for the Mass Effect community in terms of gameplay and pleasing the fan base, because you've now effectively segmented the fan base. You've got those that prefer the original trilogy and are diehards, you've got people who only like Andromeda, and then you've got people who like both. And again, to please all three, I think the best way of doing that would to be including both galaxies in some way, shape or form. Now, whether that's the game set in the far future and there's travel between galaxies, I've got no idea how BioWare would cover that, because it did take the Ark's 600 plus years to actually get to Andromeda, specifically 634 years. So again, either that or we might get a game where it's essentially split into two parts. We get a game that is, I don't know, maybe the next game has two protagonists, and one protagonist is set in the Milky Way and one protagonist is set in the far future in Andromeda, and then maybe the games, the story sort of goes in tandem with one another. Again, we've got no idea. Next up, going back to this nightclub shot that I mentioned quite a while ago in this video, we also have, as well as a Ralloy and a Turian that looks like Garrus, we have potentially an Angara from Mass Effect Andromeda. Obviously, the Angara are an alien race that we see in the Andromeda galaxy and we meet in that game, and I think that if Andromeda returns, obviously the Angara as well as the Remnant as well as the Jardan are all going to return, as they were all things that were sort of left, in my opinion, unfinished. Speaking of which, another piece of evidence for the next game potentially taking place in both Andromeda and the far future is the fact that a lot of people actually really liked Andromeda, and me, myself included. I did like Mass Effect Andromeda, although it's not perfect and it's not as good as, say, Mass Effect 2, Mass Effect 3 in my opinion. And the original Mass Effect as well. Mass Effect Andromeda was still really good fun, and you know, it kind of broke my heart to see all of the sort of lost potential there, because effectively after Andromeda, the series was put on ice. BioWare and EA actually confirmed at the time in 2018-2019 that the series was put on hold because they basically assumed that Anthem was going to be this massive success. And after the series was essentially frozen and put on ice, it was just a lot of uncertainty around Mass Effect, and I think that now the fact that we've got another Mass Effect game confirmed to be coming out, I think this is now EA and BioWare's chance to really do some right here and sort of right the wrongs of Mass Effect Andromeda, and maybe flesh out things like the Remnant, the Jardan, and maybe the relation or non-relation to the Collectors, the Reapers, and the Protheans and things like that. I think they could tie everything together in a nice little bow in this next game, and I think that's something that's really cool. Another thing we see in the reveal trailer all the way back from 2020 in the Game Awards is we actually hear the audio Godspeed Pathfinder. This is taken directly from Mass Effect Andromeda. Now, although we actually get some audio directly from both the original trilogy, we also get audio from Andromeda, again putting the time period of this next game very much into question. But again, like other things that I've mentioned in this video, a lot of things here, they included intentionally, they included on purpose references to Andromeda, shots of both galaxies, the shots of the Dead Reapers, the audio specifically from Andromeda. They included all of these things for a reason. So again, we're just going to have to wait and see how that all pans out. And lastly, the last piece of evidence for the game taking place in both Andromeda as well as the far future is going back to the N7 Day 2023 trailer. In this trailer we see a brand new character which a lot of people have said is Commander Shepard, a lot of people have said it could be Ryder, a lot of people have said it could be a brand new protagonist. Personally, I'm in the camp of this is going to be a brand new protagonist, but again, knowing the love for Shepard, BioWare could just pull some magic and have Shepard return. But at the same time, this character, in terms of the armour as well as also new vehicles and weapons that we've seen for the next Mass Effect game in concept art, it all looks very futuristic. And obviously the game, takes place in the far future anyway. It's a sci-fi fantasy genre sort of type of game anyway in terms of the Mass Effect universe. So, but I don't mean that. I mean in terms of the Mass Effect universe and lore and form design in the Mass Effect universe, this armour and as well as this new ship and other things that we've seen, it all looks very futuristic. It looks almost Andromeda-like in terms of how they would design things like the Tempest, for example, as well as Ryder's armour. For me, this looks more like something Ryder would wear than Shepard would wear, and again, it's really interesting. But obviously Ryder was never an N7 operative, so for me this has got to be either Shepard or a new character, again putting the time period of this next game completely into shambles, completely into question. We don't know currently when the next time period of the next game is going to be. So I guess in conclusion, if you look at all of the evidence that I've talked about today, there's obviously a lot more going for the original trilogy just purely for the fact that, Liara exists, Liara's there, as well as we've got, the Perfect Destroy ending, as well as the Stargazer sort of chat at the end of Mass Effect 3, there are hints at Shepard returning. We've got this new N7 Day trailer with this new protagonist, which could be Commander Shepard. But again, don't rule out Andromeda, and definitely do not rule out the fact that this game could take place, in the far, far, far future, because BioWare also know that a lot of people played and liked Mass Effect Andromeda, and they definitely know that Andromeda is loved. And I think that going into the next game, I think BioWare have got some very important decisions to make, specifically regarding how they address Mass Effect Andromeda, as well as the various endings for Mass Effect 3. I think that's going to be really interesting, especially how they address Liara as well as you know, Shepard's sacrifice or non-sacrifice, or Shepard being alive. Again, it's just, at the minute, it's just a speculation mess, as I like to call it. It's a big wibbly wobbly ball of loads of different things with loads of evidence for quite a few different things, really, that we're just going to have to wait and see from BioWare until they confirm it. Now, in terms of my closing argument, personally, I think this game is going to take place in both galaxies, and I think it's going to take place in the far future. I don't think the game's going to take place relatively shortly after Mass Effect 3. I think that it's going to take place in the far future, sort of to please both sets of fans, purely to say, like, oh, we've got Liara returning, maybe, you know, for example, Samara or maybe Rex returns as well. I don't know, but, you know, other characters that can live that long. I really hope they don't go the route of time travel, or, you know, they cryo-freeze Shepard or something. I really hope they don't go the route of that. Personally, I want this next game, Mass Effect 5, Mass Effect 4, Andromeda 2, Electric Boogaloo, whatever the next game's going to be called, I want it to be a clean slate for the Mass Effect series. For me, I want this next game to be a brand new entry point, which is what Andromeda was meant to be. And I also want this to be an entry point for people who played the original trilogy, the Legendary Edition, as well as Andromeda. I want this to be the Mass Effect game, the game that sort of revitalizes and almost restarts the franchise and puts it back into the eye of pop culture, because Mass Effect has been a sort of stagnant franchise since 2021, I'd argue. And obviously this channel has now morphed effectively into a sort of semi-Mass Effect news channel, and, you know, as soon as the next game was revealed in 2020, and then in 2021 we got the Legendary Edition, Mass Effect has almost had this, it's almost been brought back to life with a defibrillator. It's almost been like the series was on life support due to how Andromeda was received and, you know, Anthem was received, and then BioWare have come in and sort of jump-started the franchise, and then obviously there's nothing. There's not going to be any news pretty much until a very long time. I think the game's going to come out 2026, 2027, but we're hearing news that it's going to be 2029. Again, that it's not really news, it was just, you know, someone's opinion, which I did cover in its own dedicated video, again, if you want to watch that. But again, we're just going to have to wait and see. So thank you very much for watching today's video. This has been a very rambly, unscripted video that's gone on for way too long. So thank you if you have made it to the end. And don't forget to obviously like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And most importantly, tell me in the comments below, when do you think, or where do you think the next game will take place? Do you think it will be Milky Way or Andromeda? Do you think it will be set just after Mass Effect 3, or in the far distant future? Tell me in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and for more Mass Effect, EA and BioWare content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.